Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everyone of the world. I am Anagarika Drew, and tonight we have, Ayya Suvijjana with us to give a Dhamma talk. And welcome to the Empty Cloud Dhamma Extravaganza, as per usual. Hello to Kumu, hello to Adine, and hello, Ron, and hello, Denise. We'll be seeing you very soon. And of course, hello, Ayya Bimalanyani. Sadhu Ayya, thank you for coming. And that's everyone so far. So thank you for coming to those who have yet to speak as well. So first we'll start off with some meditation as guided by Ayya Suvijjana.
So get yourself in a comfortable position that you can hold. If you're able to hold your body upright without any support, that's good. If you need support, that's fine. But make sure that the natural curve of the low back is inward, not too far in and not too slouched. And if you're unable to sit up, then however the body is able to maintain an alert, let's say, posture. So this evening I'm going to speak about the 4 elements. So I'm going to give a guided meditation based on that. This is a contemplation of the body. So getting a sense of the body as a whole, and whatever position you're maintaining. And then starting at the top of the head. You can sense the top of the head, the hair at the top of the head. It might be rough or smooth. Especially after a few days after the head has been shaved, the hair is quite rough to the touch. Or it might be long and smooth. However the hair is. And then sensing the hairs on the body. There's fine hairs everywhere on the skin and coarser hairs. You might not actually feel them with the touch of your hand right now, but you can get a sense of the softness or roughness of the body hairs. Just all over the body, starting from the top of the head down to the soles of the feet. And the nails may be smooth or rough. One surface The flatter surface of the nails may be smooth and the edges may be rougher. And sensing the teeth, so where you might sense some roughness at the tops of the teeth, the edges of the teeth. And smoothness of the flat areas of the teeth. This roughness and smoothness, the experience of earth element internally. And then bringing the attention to the teeth again, feeling the hardness of the teeth. It's really hardest part of the body. Healthy teeth. Sense the hardness maybe by just the teeth just gently clenching. Teeth attached to the bone, the jawbone, the skull. This is the hardest part of the body. The flesh attached to the bone, this is soft. You just sense the hardness and softness. You can just explore the body. Maybe where the arms are resting on the thighs, you can sense the softness. Hardness and softness. This is also an experience of the earth element, internal earth element in regards to the body, bones, flesh. And then getting a sense of the weight of the body, the downward pressure of the body on the cushion or wherever the body is contacting what's supporting it. This is the heaviness of the body. You also can sense the lightness at the fingertips or the fingers. Just explore on your own. The heaviness and lightness of the body. Heaviness and lightness. And it's also how we can experience the earth element internally. smoothness, roughness, hardness, softness, heaviness and lightness. Earth element, simply earth element. Both internally and externally, earth element. Now bringing our attention to the water element. This can be experienced as moisture or cohesion. Sensing the moisture around the eyes, the tears, the moisture in the mouth, saliva. You might sense some moisture in the nasal passages, mucus. And all over the surface of the body, some perspiration, a little bit of moisture, some more in some areas and some drier areas. And the cohesiveness of the body can be sensed. This is how the water element can be experienced. Sitting with our eyes closed, sensing moisture, cohesion. This is water element. Simply water element. And bringing our attention to the fire element, the heat produced by the body. Anywhere we can sense heat or coolness, the surface of the body. Sometimes we might feel heat in the belly. Some pockets of heat. Where the body is making contact with itself, different surface areas. sensing the heat throughout the body or the cool areas of the body. Now, this is the experience of fire element. Simply fire element. And then bringing attention to wind or air element. Most predominantly the experience of in and out breathing, the expanding and contracting of the body. And also feel the flow of the air moving in all the way from the nasal passages, expanding the lungs, the diaphragm pressing down, on the organs in the abdomen. So pushing, pulling. This is called wind or air. The experience of the wind element. So we can continue exploring the body in terms of this experience of the four elements: earth, smoothness, roughness, hardness, softness, heaviness, lightness, water, moisture, cohesion, fire, heat, and coolness, and wind or air as the pushing and pulling, expanding and contracting of the body with the breath. You don't have to do it in any particular order, or you could settle on one of the elements. Just sensing the air element or the weight of the body. If you want it more stable, object of meditation. So we'll continue silently for a short while later.
Sadhu, 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 Ayya. All right. Oh, sorry.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhuttam dhammam sangham namassami. Water element externally. Internally, at least a little bit of it. So, thanks to those at Empty Cloud for inviting me to speak this evening. And excuse me, sorry, a little bit of water element and interfering with the earth element in my throat. So this is a very important teaching. It's a 4-element contemplation, particularly aimed at seeing the body, rupa kanda, the aggregate of the body, or form aggregate, to see it as non-self. Also can be used to see it as impermanent, also can be used to see it as suffering, but often, primarily, it shows up as a contemplation of non-self. The meditation I just described as a really basic form that is taught by the Pawak Sayadaw and his students. So I had been on retreat with both Shaila Catherine and Bhante Ujagra, or Sayadaw Ujagra, and both of them practiced with the Pawak Sayadaw. So I learned this method from them, and I've also adapted it some, because working with it, I adapted it a little bit because in the suttas it talks about the 4 great elements in terms of the parts of the body. So just from my own exploration and working with those different ways of experiencing each element separately. So then this is how I developed that. But basically, it's to experience the elements in terms of, it's a tactile sensation when you think about it, the smoothness, roughness, hardness, softness, heaviness, lightness of the earth. And then that can be experienced externally too. So you're experiencing the bones as hard, and the surface of the table is hard, the cushion is soft, soft parts of the body, mostly for me, the fleshy parts of the body. Also the internal organs. When you're breathing, the diaphragm is pushing down on the organs in the abdomen, and that's what's expanding, actually. When the abdomen expands or pushes outward. So that's the pushing and pulling of the wind also. So you start seeing that inner relationship, but initially you want to separate the elements, to see them separately, to learn to see them as separate elements. Something coming together temporarily and then dispersing. And this is where we see both anicca and anatta, both the impermanent nature and the non-self nature of the body. I wanted to mention that when I first heard the idea of the elements, I had this, like I studied high school or something, the table of equivalents or something, and there's this like table of all these different, I don't know how many elements there are, and their abbreviations and their weights and things like that. And this is so primitive or something like that. But when you think of it, also when you think about the elemental properties, if you want to think of things scientifically, if that's your orientation, there's a matter. Matter is composed of solid, liquid, and gas, and then heat affects those. Like for instance, water at room temperature is liquid, freezing temperature it's solid, boiling temperature it's gaseous. So heat is really important aspect or component in matter. And if you think of the human body or any living being, there's always this struggle to maintain a balance. We're always seeking solid food. We need water. We need air. We need to have the body at a particular temperature. There's a very narrow temperature range that the body is healthy at. And this is true for most living beings, even insects. In the winter time, they're finding places to hibernate, try to find some place to protect their body from the extremes of temperature. They go dormant, and then they come to life again when it's the right temperature. So and of course there's this, you see the birds and all the animals is constantly seeking food, the solid matter to help sustain the solidity of their body, enough water, enough fresh air. When I was a nursing student, we were measuring these things, of course, how much food a patient ate, how much solid waste they were eliminating, and there's what's called I&O, which is intake and output of liquid. Now it's all measured. Temperature of the body, breaths per minute. So in medicine, it's all, this was in the Buddhist time, this was, they considered the health of the body in terms of these 4 elements, and it still continues, in modern medicine. It gets more detailed. You get the oxygen saturation and there's different ways to measure the fluid balance in the body, and so it can get really complicated, but it's actually just really the basic elements that we're trying to keep in homeostasis, just as the right balance of all these things for health. So in the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha wanted us to look at these elements. They occur in the suttas quite a few times. In regards to the body. And the idea of non-self is the predominant, as I was saying. It's most commonly spoken about. So I thought I'd read. This is how the Sutta approaches. The Sutta is the greater discourse on the simile of the elephant's footprint. And this is a teaching the Blessed One gave to the bhikkhus, as probably bhikkhunis and lay people also in audience, I don't know. So I'll just cut to the part about the elements. What, friends, is the earth element? The earth element may be either internal or external. What is the internal earth element? Whatever internally belonging to oneself is solid, solidified, and clung to. That is, head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, contents of the stomach, feces, or whatever else internally belonging to oneself is solid, solidified, and clung to. This is called the internal earth element. So it's interesting describing these parts of the body, and mostly people don't like to think about the internal parts of the body as this list of, even just thinking of like individually, or the hair or the head, like if it can be seen as disgusting. If you're cleaning it up, sweeping the floor, and you see someone else's hair often, or the hair getting into the food or something like that. Oh, disgusting. So these things individually, you go, this may be seen, it's a subha, actually, or a non-beautiful, if we could think of them individually. So it says here, clung to, and this is because we cling to these things as self. Actually, is an entire package, the body. We cling to these things as self. And certainly, it would be a big sacrifice to give up a kidney. Like if somebody was dying and needed a kidney, that would be a big sacrifice on someone's part. Or bone marrow transplant. I mean, it kind of be terrifying to some people to give up some part of their body. So we cling to these things because instinctively. And also, well, I'll go back to that later, maybe. It says, now both the internal earth element and the external earth element are simply earth element, and they should be seen as it actually is with proper wisdom thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. When one sees it thus as it is with proper wisdom, one becomes disenchanted with the earth element and makes the mind dispassionate towards the earth element. So the whole purpose of really contemplating the body in terms of the elements separately, separating them, is to see the non-self nature. And then the internally and externally is really helpful too, because if you contemplate the continuous flow, I mean, like I was saying with this glass of water, you know, here it is externally, then internally, then later on externally. Certainly when we eliminate the water element, we don't want to think of it as ours anymore. But so this is one way of looking at it. The sutta is pretty interesting because it gets into the impermanent aspect as well as the non-self aspect. And it talks about when the water element, like when there's flooding and the earth is not apparent anymore, it's underwater, then there's a time when there's flooding, and so the earth appears to have disappeared. And then there's other times when the water is completely dried up, and so there's like it says, when even the external earth element, great as it is seen to be impermanent, subject to destruction, disappearance, and change, what of this body, which is clung to by craving and lasts but a while? There can be no considering that as I, or mine, or I am. So this is looking at the impermanent aspect, and how can it be considered self, myself. And then this continues through all the elements in the similar way. I'm skipping over sections of the sutta. I'm not doing a sutta discussion. I'm just focusing on the elements. But what, friends, is the water element? The water element may be either internal or external. What is the internal water element? Whatever internally belonging to oneself is water, watery, and clung to. That is bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, oil of the joints, urine, or whatever else internally belonging to oneself is water, watery, and clung to. This is called the internal water element. So this whole very appetizing list of fluid aspects of the body we cling to. But like I was saying, it's more as a whole, thinking of the body as a whole. And so he's separated this liquid aspect out. And when you really think about it, it's kind of, people, this is a suba. It's yeah. And if anyone's cared for people, you do encounter all this, have to care for this for other, other person's bodily substances. So to develop a balanced mind about these things. I mean, it's not to be repulsed but just a balanced mind and seeing things clearly as they are. So now both the internal water element and the external water element are simply water element, and they should be seen as it actually is with proper wisdom. Thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. When one sees it thus as it actually is with proper wisdom, one becomes disenchanted with the water element and makes the mind dispassionate towards the water element. So really it's seeing things as they are really should bring like a balanced, cool attitude towards these things, not repulsion, not attachment. Really seeing the dukkha and being, or the dukkha is usually translated as suffering or stress or distress. But there's a lot of suffering and distress that comes from clinging to this body. So this is a kind of the pry our grip from these the body when we start thinking it in terms of these elements. And the fire element is talked about as consuming. It's really its metabolism. It's taking in food and breaking it up and metabolizing it, producing heat. It's also aging. Yeah, he talks about the water element too, as in terms of there might be floods or there might be drought. So this water element is impermanent, subject to disappearance, to change. And what of this body which is clung to by craving and lasts but a while? There could be no considering that as I or mine or I am. And I was starting to talk about fire element. He talks about the fire element the same way. This talks about that which is warmed ages, is consumed, and by which what is eaten, drunk, consumed, and tasted gets completely digested. But he's really talking about metabolism. If you're, that we have to take in fuel. Actually, our food is fuel. And we burn it, we burn calories. So with all of the elements, fire we know can get completely out of control. There's millions of acres destroyed in California last year from fire, forest land. And then there are times when there's not enough fuel. Some people, some poor countries have to walk miles just to get enough firewood to cook their food. So this is comparing the external or the great element, fire, with the internal element of the body. And the air element is described as the internal air element. It says here too, internally belonging to oneself, but that this is the unenlightened view of things, that this is mine. But how else is he going to describe one's own body? it's difficult not to use conventional terms to be able to understand it initially. And what is air? Air is airy and clung to. That is upgoing winds, downgoing winds, winds in the belly, winds in the bowels, winds that course through the limbs, in breath and out breath, or whatever else internally belonging to oneself is air, airy, and clung to. So he treats it the same way as talking about the great external air element, and sometimes there's huge windstorms, and sometimes there's so little wind that you have to use a fan to get some circulation. So both internally and externally, air element is simply air element. And it should not be seen as mine, myself, I am. So this is the most frequent way you'll see in the suttas these four elements talked about. In the Satipatthana Sutta, it just speaks about the four elements. It doesn't go into the parts of the body. So it's harder to figure out how to use this contemplation as a meditation. I've seen initially the teachers I was going to a Bayagiri monastery, and both Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Pasno were co-abbots there, and the way I was hearing it spoken about was more like kind of experiential, like I was talking about the glass of water, seeing it externally, then seeing how it's internally, and then externally again. Food, when you see the food externally, solid, and then you're chewing it. One description I heard that was this is I didn't hear it at a Bayagiri, but another teacher, is you take the food into your mouth and you're chewing the food. It starts out as solid, and then it becomes liquid because it's mixing with the saliva, and you're breaking it up with your mouth, so it becomes more liquidy. Then you swallow it. They also mentioned air, the empty. When you're putting the spoon in your mouth, you're opening up your mouth and you're getting a little bit of air with it. And also the temperature of the food, you can sense the temperature. If it's cold to start with, it gets warm. If it's hot to start with, it cools down. It adjusts to the body temperature. So you can experience in a daily activity these four elements, externally, internally. I use that Pawak Sayadaw, the Pawak Sayadaw's method throughout the day too, sensing the hardness and softness externally, smoothness, all those different qualities that I mentioned. Can go outside and feel the wind. The movement of the wind. This is why they characterize the air as wind sometimes, because there's the movement of the air, the breath, and then you can see it's like reflected in the movement of the actual wind itself. So the heat of the sun, going outside, you can get really do some wonderful, with walking meditation, some wonderful 4-element contemplation. You can focus on one of the elements, or you can go through all 4 elements. But if the heat or the cold outside, the wind, the movement of the wind, the solidness of the earth under your feet, and with the body, the movement of the body. Someone described that was the wind, the pushing and pulling of the walking. It's more wind, but you can feel the air when you're walking. You actually feel the air moving past you as you're moving. Or you can feel the solidity of the body as you're walking. So you can look at the elements internally or externally during walking meditation. So it's used, it's most useful for insight practice. And it can bring a degree of samatha. What I was describing, the guided meditation, especially if you just focus on, go through all the 4 elements and then stay at one, especially the breath, then it can bring you to access concentration. So it can bring the mind to its settledness and stillness, quietness of mind. But its great strength is the insight practice, looking at anicca, anatta, dukkha, anicca, anatta, looking at the suffering or discontent or whatever you want to call dukkha. We could just say dukkha, and the impermanence and non-self. So that's its greatest strength. It can bring settledness of mind, and then one can intentionally, when the mind seems settled enough, take a more stable object. With the breath, particularly, to stabilize the breath at one point rather than the actual movement of the breath. And the knowing of the breath, it's the in-breath, out-breath, but you have to intentionally switch. At this point, the mind is very settled and it seems appropriate. Then you can switch. And then it can lead to stronger states of absorption or stronger settledness, stillness, unification of mind. But ultimately, it's an insight practice. So I think I can just leave it now to questions and discussion.
Namayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase
Sadhu, 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 anumodhami. Thank you. Thank you for that Dhamma talk, Ayya. Sadhu. And good evening to more friends here. Now is the time to write out your questions, and we will go through them as best we can. So far, we have just one from Denise, who says, Ayya, can it be said that aging is the diminishing of these elements, or the slow fading of the cohesiveness of these separate elements that we understand as our capital B body?
Yes, that's a good contemplation, actually. And the fire element, its aging is mentioned, but there's other suttas when it talks about the elements going out of balance. And so illness can be manifested by imbalance in these elements, but also with aging, things gradually are going out of balance. The fire element is becoming, I guess it's consuming, it talks about consuming. So it's a deterioration of the body. Actually, we do have a tendency more for dehydration. The skin is losing it, its suppleness, because it's losing the oils and moisture. Well, could you repeat that again? How did she phrase that?
Sure. She wrote, can it be said that aging is the diminishing of these elements, or the slow fading of the cohesiveness of these separate elements?
Okay, yeah, so that would be, cohesiveness is the water element. So it is gradually breaking apart. It is gradually losing its cohesiveness. That's one good way to look at it. And that's gradually, things are going out of balance. The body is struggling harder and harder to keep the balance. So for different people, different things are going out of balance. You notice, like, the older you get each decade, there's more things going on with the body that you have to try to correct and care for, and you have to be more careful with the body. It's more fragile, like it's more and more fragile. Oh, yeah, so yeah, diminishing of the bone, for instance. A lot of people are taking calcium and different supplements to try to maintain the strength of the bone. We're learning, that it is diminishing. And then, I learned in biology, with the cell division, like with an embryo, the cell division is very rapid, and then a fetus, that it's slowing down a little bit, but it's quite rapid. And for children, the reason why the child grows is because of the rapid cell division, and so the bones and everything are putting out a lot of cell growth. And then by the time we're in our 20s, that really it's slowing down throughout the growth process. And then at a certain point, it maxes, it stops, and then it starts the opposite. The body isn't producing enough cells to keep up with the years that are going by. So it is a gradual deterioration that's happening of these elements. So yeah, that's something we can contemplate, not to get distressed or discouraged or something like that. We should it's good to care for our bodies, do the best we can to care for them. But this is just a normal fact of life. This is just the normal course of things as they actually are. So this is impermanence And for many people, if we're clinging to our bodies, this is a big oh no when we start seeing the first gray hairs and signs of aging. Oh no. So, or we can just be at peace with that. No, it's just a natural course of things, and be compassionate towards ourselves and others, but also develop wisdom with it, with the understanding of the process. If we're fortunate enough to live long, not everybody has that opportunity. Were there more questions?
Mm-hmm. So we have one from Mary Beth 03, who says, what book were you referencing for this sutta?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. This is the middle length discourses of the Buddha. And the sutta that I was reading from is number 28 in the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle length discourses. Oh, I'm down. 10 is the Satipatthana, the elements. But this, the greater discourse on the simile of the elephant's footprint, and that's number 28. Can they see it?
It'd be a little rough. Yep.
There
it
go.
is.
So yeah, and the Satipatthana, I just mentioned it. But that has a, in the contemplation of the body, it's one of the, it's a contemplation on the elements. And that one just mentions, I didn't read from that one, but I could just, are there more questions?
There's one more.
Okay.
So it's one from Ron. He says, for a specific insight practice like this one, do you recommend this as something to visit now and then, or something to work at solidly for a week, a month, longer?
Well, I think it's a good idea to have this as in your repertoire. And I would recommend, you could have that as your primary meditation, but it's good to balance it out with one of the Brahma Viharas, I would say, like a loving kindness or goodwill or compassion, developing altruistic joy, or this actually should help you develop equanimity. But I think it's a good daily practice, and it can be your primary practice. But some other practices that bring up joy is a good balance to these, because depending on your personality, you could become depressed. But when I was doing this practice, compassion actually spontaneously arose because I was seeing, not only for myself and for other human beings, this struggle. I was doing walking meditation outside one time, and there was this little moth, a skipper. It's a daytime moth, and it was on my walking path. I was doing back and forth walking meditation, and so it flew a little bit ahead of me, and then I kept walking, and it flew a little bit further ahead, And I could see, it was naturally just frightened of my movement. But for some reason, the image of it, like all the water element escaping this little moth and it perishing, came to my mind. And I thought, that's such a fragile little being. They're so dependent on, and just like us, they're dependent on the elements being in the proper balance. And then it was winter time and it was freezing outside, and I was thinking about the birds, and they had to use their feathers and their metabolism to keep warm, even though it was like freezing outside. So it was like, not really pity. It shouldn't, I think Bhante Sudasa was talking this morning that compassion shouldn't increase the suffering. You shouldn't, it shouldn't be pity. But just a wish for the well-being. It's a wish for their being free from suffering. And somebody else had the experience. They had been on a retreat a day long with me, and the next day they were driving and they were getting impatient with the person in front of them because they were driving slowly. And then she was getting angry, and then suddenly it occurred to her, we're all made of the same stuff. This is what she told me. Somehow and that just kind of just tore apart the anger somehow. Just that we're all dealing with the same stuff. So to kind of cutting down the barriers between us and others can naturally arise from this. But I really would recommend working with other practices too, that bring up joy.
Sadhu. And we have one more question, but it is pretty unrelated. So, Bhavani, perhaps you might consider asking your question again this Friday, same time, 7:30 for Monk Chat. We also can ask the audience, the live audience, if they have questions. Anyone? All right. Well, I think it's a slightly earlier evening then. Thank yous and sadhus to you, Ayya. And reminder to everyone else here that tomorrow we'll be having another Suta study at 8 a.m. and another Dhamma talk again at 7:30 p.m. New York City time, Eastern time. For now, let's do 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Good night, everyone, and have a great